Welcome to this episode of the Backbone podcast. Today we sit with Linda Puffenberger from the Maryland State Highway Administration and Ranger Sarah Milbourne from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, discussing the collaboration and partnership on the restoration of the Casselman River Bridge. I hope you enjoy. Good morning. We are chatting here this morning with Sarah and Linda. If you could both take a moment to introduce yourself. Sarah, we'll start with you.
Sure. I'm Sarah Milbourne. I'm a park ranger with the Maryland Park Service, and I currently serve in the role as Western Region Manager, which covers the counties of Frederick, Washington, Allegheny, and Garrett counties.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time this morning, Sarah.
You bet.
And I'm Linda Puffenberger. I'm SHA's district engineer for District 6, which also covers Western Maryland, but Garrett, Allegheny, and Washington counties.
That's awesome. Well, thank you as well. So we are chatting this morning about a really interesting and unique project, I think. And I'm excited to have the State Highway represented in Maryland DNR. So we are chatting about the Casselman River Bridge today. And it's relevant because the bridge has some work going on. You know, there's scaffolding built up. Every time you drive by, you see workers kind of crawling around the site. Is it a restoration or is it a rebuilding, or is there another term that you all are using?
Yeah, I think I would use the term restoration. And, you know, there's always been, you know, a maintenance plan for the Casselman River Bridge, but we're over the last few years, we've noticed really noticeable shifts and widening gaps in the stonework. And so although we've had really great Band-Aid fixes, they can only last so long. And the Department of Natural Resources Engineering and Construction Unit realized that we really need to move towards a fix. So they noticed missing grout and some stones have been dislodged. This can be the engineer over there can chime in about some of this, but you know, some of the shifting weight of the bridge has caused, you know, some of that. And so restoration really is what I would lean into as sort of the description of what we're doing now, and what you're seeing with the scaffolding and all that work that's going on at the bridge.
Awesome. And DNR, Department of Natural Resources, is involved because that is a Maryland state park, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it the smallest in Maryland?
It is not. Yeah, I'm going to say, and I'm sorry I didn't do my homework here, but I'm pretty sure White Oak State Park on the Eastern Shore is the smallest state park.
Oh.
But Casselman is pretty close. And I'll check that before I make it off today to make sure I told you.
Well, and no problem. You are the Western Maryland representative.
Yeah, so that's all I identify with.
Exactly. Because as you've shared with me before, you have a sticker that says West is best.
I do. I do. You know, Linda's shaking her head. She knows.
It's right here on my laptop.
Awesome.
Great.
Awesome. Well, and for those of you not familiar with the Casselman Bridge, it was the largest single-span stone bridge when it was built in 1813.
Mm-hmm.
And it carried the national road over it, or what is known as Route 40 now, in Grantsville. So it's a pretty unique site if you haven't seen it in person. The project should be completed. Are they thinking spring of 2027 now?
Yeah, that sounds about right. And
Okay.
and really the way that projects go, it could be longer than that. I would guess that it's possible that
Okay.
it makes sense. Things happen during construction, and even you have to think about things like procurement and all of that, you know, plays into it. So we always aim for a date, and then we tack on a few months or
Sure.
even a year.
You can see the
Right,
bridge.
Linda? You know how that goes.
Yeah. You can see the bridge from Route 40 now, the realigned Route 40. So it's kind of neat to be able to cruise through there. On one side, you see Interstate 68, and then you're on Route 40 and you see the Casselman Bridge to the other side. So transportation corridor, I think it's significant there in Grantsville.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, um, Linda, did you have anything to add as far as the project goes getting started? How is SHA or State Highway Administration involved in this unique project?
So in this case, we steward a federal grant program called the Transportation Alternatives Program, and that's intended to look at different modes of transportation from vehicle traffic, pedestrians, bicycles, um, any sort of wheeled, non-motorized traffic. And then it also can be used for cultural sites, for historic preservation, especially as they relate to transportation. And kind of like what you were just saying, this corridor was the center of westward expansion of our nation. If you look at a weighted average map for how population moved west, it centers around the national road until it reached Illinois. And we have three versions of that corridor right here in eyesight, like you said. So it's really worth preserving that and being eligible for the Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP as we call it. It was an easy fit. It just made sense to help preserve this part of that story.
Fantastic. So, can one of you explain the significance of this bridge? Why in the world did they decide to tackle the largest stone single span when they decided to build the Castleman Bridge?
So I'll say a little something, and then Sarah might also want to add. At the time, there was the anticipation that the C&O Canal would tie into the Casselman River waterway. So the ability to move larger watercraft through was planned, never actually happened that way. But, between the flashiness of a flood, the waterway rises and falls with precipitation, and then having just larger watercraft was what they expected. Now, it didn't happen that way, but we still got a really cool structure at the end of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. It was the first federally financed highway in the United States, which is really, really neat to know. And as Linda pointed out, around the 1750s, you had Nemacolin, who was a Delaware Indian, and Thomas Cressup blazing official paths through the countryside. And that section was, and the Castleman was, it was considerable for wagons and such, to cross. And so it was an important route. And before that time, again, they were having to ford that part of the river at the narrow sections, and it was actually called Little Crossings by Washington, which is pretty neat. And still, you'll hear people use that term today in Grantsville to describe that. So the decision to build that and to build such a significant structure was, and I'm sure Linda will speak to this, was quite an engineering feat, and really has such a lasting legacy. But it had such purpose at the time that it was built, to really allow for wagons and even a military route, as General Edward Braddock was also, marching west on the national road, which is also really neat.
Yeah, and you mentioned Washington. We've kind of anecdotally been thinking that George Washington is the president, not necessarily president at the time, but the president who has spent probably the most amount of time in Garrett County. Have you heard
Sure.
it worded that way?
Yeah, yeah, and at the time he was surveying early in this area, so there's lots of really cool history that's been revealed in recent times, that while he was surveying under Braddock during that time frame, and on that road, he may have fired the first shot of the French and Indian War. So there's a lot of really cool history that's wrapped around who became later our president, but at the time there were a lot of missteps even by Washington during this time. He was really starting to learn how to be a soldier and then a general. So lots of really great history in the Cumberland and Garrett County areas wrapped up around Washington. And he did, of course, spend a lot of time during that time because he was doing a lot of surveying and then that campaign with Braddock.
That sounds like we need a second podcast episode here, where we can really
So much to talk
it's so much history. It really is fascinating and really speaks to the point that our American history happened in the rural farms and fields and forests and, really built the nation from literally the ground up.
about.
It's very cool.
Mhm.
So, Linda, the story goes that when they were building this bridge, David Shriver was the chief engineer. I don't know if this is true or not, but when they were building the bridge, they had supports, obviously, for the stone arch, and they were making a big to-do about the opening. And, the westward expansion was so important. So all the dignitaries of the day were coming up to do a bridge grand opening. But Mr. Shriver stood under the bridge the day before and had them remove the supports. And the story I heard was that he had said he didn't want to be alive, didn't want to be around if that bridge failed. Is that true?
Your guess
I have heard that.
I've also
I have heard that story. Yeah, that's funny.
But the bridge held, and it's held for 200 years.
right.
Well, more than 200 now.
Sarah, I'll add that I've heard that he came in the night, like in the cover of night, to
Oh, okay.
actually stand under the bridge and had his people remove the support beams so that if it failed, it would have, like you said, would have failed in that moment and he wouldn't have been embarrassed the next day. So yeah, it's a great story. We love the folklore that's tied around a lot of these really cool historic structures.
Yeah. Well, and could you just imagine the stress? I would be such a ball of anxiety. Just, the largest single stone span, people said it couldn't be done. And my goodness. Yeah.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, I feel that way now. We open a new alignment of road. And I don't mean to say that I don't trust our engineering practice, but, you know, as a practitioner, you always want things to go well. We're here to serve the public. And serving the public is filled with things that you can't quite anticipate. So
Sure.
I
I
always want
appreciate
to
it.
go well.
Well, to that end, why has this bridge lasted so long when maybe some of the newer bridges haven't? I don't, you know, know about Maryland specific bridges that haven't, but it seems like a lot of modern technology takes a lot more maintenance, a lot more maintenance, I guess, for lack of a better word. Why is this bridge still standing?
So I'd say it's probably a combination of two things. One being that an arch, with a keystone in it is one of the oldest technologies that mankind has. We've really had, thousands of years to refine that concept. It's using nature, it uses gravity to create its strength that puts the pressure of, the load, the weight of the structure out to the edges, transfers load out to the natural ground. So that alone is just a very straightforward, very using nature in the same vein that you want to work in type of concept. And then it also, um, not to poo poo anything that we're doing now, but we're using a much more created type of material at this point. A concrete beam for a bridge or a steel beam for a bridge is created under very specific conditions and it has to be maintained in those very specific conditions. We do see some of the age, the aging that Sarah Milborn was describing earlier. Um, the rock that's there is a pretty strong type of rock. We're also lucky that the local stone here is a strong type of stone, so it's not prone to lamination or delamination, although there are some instances of that that are contributing to what we see out there now. But a lot of things just came together well. And we're also not loading it with traffic the way modern structures are loaded, um, either from a speed or a weight perspective. You wouldn't think that speed really hurts a structure, but it actually does. It's hard to hit that sudden impact. So if we were running tractor and trailers over the Casselman River Bridge, it would not have held up as well.
That's
But we
fair.
were smart enough to not do that. I have our forefathers to thank for making that decision.
And you mentioned it's natural stone. So is it one of the only bridges in Maryland, or maybe I'm making that up, but that was created and still lasting with natural stone?
No, well, so we actually, maybe not on the state highway system, but there are, Washington County, as an example, has several stone arch bridges, and that also use the native stone there, some of
Mm.
which was limestone, a notoriously hard type of rock. Um, and they also last pretty well. You know, it's the Roman aqueducts use the same concept as this, and they're still standing. So that kind of helps demonstrate just how top notch the technology is.
I still can't quite wrap my head around it and how this technology that we look at as antiquated and, we have much better alternatives now. But, I think the proof is in the pudding that these structures are still standing. And to your point, working with gravity is very helpful
It is.
in the longevity. Was this bridge ever close to being lost or
Not to my
demolished?
knowledge. I think once we moved traffic off of it and kind of moved into the restoration, as Sarah mentioned, I think that did a lot to preserve it. But Sarah may also know some history that I do not.
Yeah, no, I agree. There hasn't ever been a time that we were in fear of losing it, or that there was any sort of discussion about demolishing the bridge because of how well it's stood the test of time. And I think though the measure to protect it in the 30s by moving traffic off of it played a significant role in keeping this bridge. And maybe we would have had to cross that bridge, pun intended, if that had happened. But yeah, great thought from the folks that came before us to protect such a gorgeous structure. So nothing really to add.
So to that point, we had obviously foot traffic and soldiers and um, horse and buggy, for lack of a better term, automobiles, early automobiles. Was there any other kind of traffic? Did they do early logging trucks or anything of that nature across the bridge?
I mean, it was the main point west, and that was the only place that um, that structures could cross, the Castleman, or not structures, but vehicles of,
Mhm.
of any sort. So I would imagine any work that was happening at all, before the 30s, would have crossed that bridge. So I know that there are some pictures that you can see of different types of vehicles on the bridge, but I haven't noticed any logging trucks, but I would have to guess that there probably would have been significant weight, from those types of vehicles early on.
Just imagine the things that bridge has seen. It's crazy.
A witness bridge, as
Yes.
you could call it, right? Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Well, and it's really fascinating, whether intentional or unintentional, the straightening or the realignment of the original um, national road, probably to your point, played a significant role in getting that faster moving traffic, heavier traffic off of the bridge and preserving it. Um, I think it's so fascinating that essentially the parking lot there in front of the Mountain Grape Tavern and between Mountain Grape and Penn Alps is the old national road. And you can walk through there, but just the realignment is impressive to see where they took out the minor turns and was able to essentially speed that traffic up. It's just, I don't know, little pea brain. It just the things
I
that
love
that
that stuff.
bridge has seen.
Agreed. Just driving anywhere along the National Pike, that there are old alignments to the right and to the left, and a couple of others, small stone arch structures that you see in Garrett County at Shade Hollow, as an example. And they're not as well preserved for the they'll look as great. But yeah, just that those little glimpses into what used to be such an essential part of everyday life for the local folks and folks traveling through. I'm with you. I totally nerd out on that stuff.
Uh, this wasn't in the show notes, but as an aside, I just noticed a couple weeks ago that there's an old mail pouch tobacco painted barn, and I would assume that it was part of the original alignment, because it's a little bit off of the side of the current alignment. And I just thought same thing, like, wow, that was a big piece of daily life at one time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's pretty cool. So, how difficult or easy has it been to coordinate a project of this scope to join together the transportation end of it, but preservation and multiple, federal, state, and local agencies?
I think it's been pretty good.
Good.
I don't want to step over you, Linda, but we have long since had a great partnership with the State Highway Administration. We are state government, so we do work well together. But for me personally, I've worked with Linda on other projects. I know Linda well. So this isn't our first time meeting. And, partnerships are really important because each of us have our expertise and we have our strengths, but we also have our weaknesses. And that's where other agencies really provide critical support and funding in this case, to help with big projects like this. This is a pretty heavy lift. And it requires a lot of coordination, a lot of again, experts, preservation specialists, contractors, and then you're looking at natural resources managers, for us to really move a project like this of this magnitude forward. And from start to finish, hopefully finish, on that wonderful timeline that you shared with us a little earlier, will go smooth. And a lot of that is collaborating, of course, but communication, being available to one another, when there are questions or concerns. These projects really do require that joint effort. And we certainly have that with the State Highway Administration and our other partners that are helping in this project.
Yeah, I would agree. Um, our longstanding working relationship was established long before this, and I'm sure we'll be doing plenty of things together. The only hurdles we had to get over were kind of those external forces that are really not in any one office's or one agency's control. Rising construction costs, makes it harder to uh, nail down funding through grants as they come in. But every hurdle that we come to, somebody raises their hand and says, "Oh, I've got this," or SHA is up inspecting now, because inspection is something that we do all the time, and we're happy to be part of the project that way and not just at the front end with funding. So we just always show up for each other. I I love working with Sarah. Anytime that opportunity comes, I'm like, I'm in, I'm ready.
Same.
That's awesome. Now, maybe you could speak a little bit to the specifics of inspection. So, with a stone structure like this, are there different criteria used for inspection, quote unquote, or is it a general bar or floor level of, it has to be able to withstand these certain pressures?
Sure. Well, so there are some standards and specifications that apply across the industry when you're dealing with the structure, but the specifications for this contract would have been written with that historic preservation element in mind. So the use of appropriate materials for the type of structure that we're talking about, um, And those performance metrics have been defined differently for the inspection staff, but they're used to looking at, okay, here's what we're going to work with today. Here's how it needs to perform long term. This is when I come in and, check the strength of that material as it cures. So it's slightly different metrics, but it's the same process that we use all the time.
Interesting. Well, from those of us on the outside, is there a like one test or how do you, measure the strength of a material as it cures, for example?
So the best example that would be a mortar or a concrete. There's going to be
Hmm.
have a limited or little concrete on this structure, but there's going to be a lot of mortar work. So, as the mix for that is defined from the historically accurate element,
Hmm.
and um, that probably cures on the order of a week or maybe 14 days. So you set some of that material aside and you break it under very um, regimented conditions, and here's how we expect it to perform, and did it perform that way. So if for some reason we would find that it's not meeting the strength, then we'll have to go back and revisit how we're going to address that. But that's fortunately that's rare, especially when you're working with a good group of artisans like we have up there on the project site now.
Hmm. And I really appreciate that you just said artisans, because that is a lot of this project, returning it to its original historical significance. Um, so that to that end, they're replacing mortar, keeping the stones in the same place or generally the same place, but taking out mortar and replacing it. Or what's the extent of the rebuilding or restoration that they're doing there?
How about you, Sarah? Can you describe this?
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, so that process, that repointing process is of course filling in that mortar. They are cataloging all the stones to make sure that they go back pretty close to how they are now. And they have a pretty sophisticated um, video system. I'm using very antiquated terms here, but they are taking 3D pictures of this bridge from start to finish, which is really exciting. And that'll be available to the public to actually see the bridge as it's been under construction for the duration. So I get emails, I think every Monday morning, that show the progress of the bridge, which is pretty neat. So the idea in what we refer to as sort of historic trades and the work that happens from preservation specialists and contractors that again specialize in this space is to be historically accurate to um, and sometimes they may use somewhat different material, but it'll look accurate to the time. With advancements in science and technology, they understand, this might work better than that. But again, it's to make it appear as it would have in 1813, and so we're really fortunate to have that accuracy play out in a project like this. And that's with all of our projects across the state. Anytime that we're taking on doing restoration or preservation of any of our sites and facilities, we're looking to folks that are trained and specialized to do that work so that, again, we're preserving. Um, and we have a lot of discerning eyes out there. There are a lot of people who really do know what they're looking at and know when something is off. And so it's important for us to, as a nod to those history buffs, but also to the legacy of these projects across Maryland. It's really important for us to do it right. And this is a big project. So, when we were, trying to identify the right people, there's only but so many that do this kind of work too. So, narrowing it down and then finding the right person was a heavy lift in itself.
It sounds incredible, though. I can't wait to get out there and touching these stones are the same. These are the same stones. These are
Mhm.
1813 stones, or I guess before that, but um, Is there anything else that's special about the bridge? Is there a certain viewpoint, or is there something special like that that visitors can expect whenever the project is complete?
I have something. I have a couple of things. You know, the staff at New Germany are the folks that are the stewards of that property of the Casselman River Bridge State Park, and very much embrace the history of the park. You know, the area, you know, that's considered the state park where you can park. I mean, the locals call it Chipmunk Park, and we hold on to those pieces of those memories. We hold them in high regard because it our local uh, visitors are just as important as the folks that are passing through to head west, or are there just for a time. And so the bridge has served as a backdrop for travelers all that through all that time, and it will continue to do so. But one of the lesser known stories that has um, really dominated our recent thoughts are stories about enslaved people traveling and what those routes look like across the United States as people were trying to escape to freedom. And so we had our historian spent a lot of time in partnership with Maryland Tourism, who brought to the forefront that there potentially was significant travel, again, for those that were fleeing slavery in Maryland and Virginia. And we were able to identify a particularly enslaved person named Josiah Henson, who we were able to again identify that he would have used the national road, and in particular the Casselman River Bridge, prior to emancipation, to to seek freedom. And so we submitted all of our findings, all of that evidence, to the National Park Service for the Network to Freedom designation. And we were told, not, I think, 2 months ago, that we had gained that certification, which is pretty exciting. So one of the things we're going to see in the future is more interpretation telling that story. It's really important for us to tell all stories of marginalized people and women, who would have played key roles or would have traveled across sites like this. So you're going to see interpretive signage that will help tell that story. And again, active interpretation by the folks that manage the site, because we really want to acknowledge all the steps that were taken, and all the wagons or all the horses that would have crossed that bridge, not just the ones that are well known, like Washington and crossing little crossings, or some of the more known figures in history.
Fantastic. And we will do our best to link that federal designation information in the show notes here too, so you can do a little bit more research and see the other sites that are designated as well.
Awesome. Thanks,
Yeah.
Sarah. Yeah, I can provide that document to you too. It's really well done, and it contains so much history, and ties really into this whole region, so that you can see a lot about the movement of enslaved people at the time.
Absolutely. And I think that word really sums everything up, is the movement. It was daily life, it was regional life, it was the westward expansion, and the Castleman Bridge was so integral to all of that. Um, and especially as we're celebrating America's 250 this year, and then in particular the Garrett 250 event coming up on July 18th. Just a way to showcase the stories that really made America.
Mhm.
Linda, did you have anything you wanted to add about the bridge or the project, or any lesser known stories from your perspective?
It's really hard to follow what Sarah just said. Well, and because of that skew, the bridge would naturally want to twist under load. So when a heavy load is on top of it, it would start to fail and twist out. But again, the engineering and the artisans at the time accounted for that. And the stones, as they were cut and shaped to be in the structure, um, were shaped in such a way as to act against that.
Wow.
It would be the discerning engineering nerd eye to see that.
So cool.
Yeah, that is so cool. You don't have to be an engineering nerd in particular, just a nerd.
Just an everyday nerd like me.
Yeah, I think the three of us could really talk a long time about the nuances of this project, but we're just about out of time. Is there anything else for either of you that you want to share?
No, no, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with the two of you, though. This is such a cool thing to showcase, and I'm glad that you've spearheaded to take the time to do that. This is really neat.
Well, thank you, thank you, and I do have to shout out Shelley with the state office. She has really been integral in kind of nerding out with me. We were talking about the project, and there is a project web page available. Is that a public URL that we could put in the show notes so folks could keep up with the project?
I believe so. Sarah, do you know if that's on?
I think it is. Yeah. And if it is, we'll make it available to you, Sarah.
Okay.
And we can also, for fun, I could probably pull some of the pictures from the construction, to date. I can pull some of those pictures so you can see some of the work and link those for folks to see. We're always happy to share and be transparent about some of these projects, but also just because, again, we all like to nerd out and be excited about the work that's being done, especially in support. In a lot of ways, it is saving that structure, but we also have an eye to the economic investment it is for a town like Grantsville to make sure that one of the drawing structures, why people may visit that area, besides the travel mug and pen alps and the Casselman restaurant, which are also really great staples of that community. We want to make sure that we're keeping an eye to tourism. So we'll share what we can so people can get an update, and then have folks be on the lookout for the next year for hopefully a start to finish compilation of how the bridge came along. I can't wait to see that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for taking the time. I really do appreciate it, and we'll be able to see this article in the Lakefront magazine.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you both.